The moment you wake up in ancient Egypt, it's as if the sun itself has decided to personally roast you alive. The heat isn't just a part of the environment, it feels like a divine punishment from Ra, the sun god, whose scorching rays blast through your reed hut. The sun doesn't just shine in Egypt, it attacks. You lie there in your flimsy linen sheet, which is more of a suggestion than an actual shield against the heat. The Nile's promised breeze? Gone probably before the time the pyramids were finished. By the time you stumble out of bed, it's already 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 degrees Celsius. And that's just the start. Now, don't get excited about finding any relief. There's no SPF 50, no aloe vera, and forget about a floppy hat. Ancient Egyptians might have smeared themselves with oils for protection, if they were wealthy or worked in the temple. But if you're just a regular person, your best option is to smear yourself with mud or, for the truly daring, crocodile dung. You read that right, crocodile dung, which might protect you from turning into a human torch. The stones under your feet are already cooking by midday, and by the time you find some shade, maybe behind a wall made of mud bricks, which is already sweating under the sun, you're the human version of a roast chicken. And don't even think about complaining. Ra, the sun god, is watching. In ancient Egypt, the sun was more than just weather, it was divine authority. The hotter the day, the more powerful Ra was feeling. So, when you're burning alive, remember, it's basically a spiritual compliment. Surviving a single day in ancient Egypt requires you to have one thing in spades: tolerance for extreme discomfort. But don't worry, you'll get used to it, or at least you'll try to. After all, it's only morning, and you haven't even started your day yet. You've got a lot more sweat, flies, and inevitable suffering ahead of you. By now you're fully aware of just how unforgiving the Egyptian sun is, but here's the kicker: your morning is only getting started. You need to bathe, right? Well, lucky you, because the mighty Nile, which has been worshipped for centuries as the lifeblood of Egypt, is just around the corner. But before you get any romantic ideas about the river, let's talk about its not-so-charming side. First off, you can smell the Nile long before you see it. Picture this: a mix of fish, swamp, and, well, whatever else people and livestock decide to toss in. It's the world's worst fish market combined with a swamp, but hey, it's your only option. And forget about privacy. Bathing here is a public event, shared with families, neighbors, and even a few livestock who might wander in for a drink. If you're lucky, you'll also share it with the occasional ibis that likes to nibble at your ankles as if you're part of the food chain. Soap? Nope. That luxury hasn't been invented yet. Instead, you'll get the ancient Egyptian exfoliation treatment, sand. Just rub it over your skin like nature's abrasive scrub and hope for the best. After all, who needs a loofah when you've got sandpaper in the form of grains? But even that doesn't guarantee much success. If you're really unlucky, you might get a visit from a crocodile, which has probably mistaken your laundry pile for a snack. Speaking of laundry, that's done the same way, pounded against rocks in the Nile. And no, you won't get clean. You'll get less sticky, while also avoiding getting eaten by crocodiles, and that's about the best you can expect from this sacred river. As for the water itself, let's not sugarcoat it. The Nile may be revered, but it's also shared by, well, everyone. People, livestock, and even funeral boats all contribute to this waterway's charm. Oh, and while you're at it, don't forget about the occasional sewage runoff from upstream. So, sure, the Nile is sacred, but it's also a biohazard. After you scrub and rinse off the remnants of your less than refreshing swim, you'll feel only slightly less sticky but probably much more concerned about what's living in the water with you. Maybe leeches, maybe something worse. But you don't have much time to think about that. There's work to be done, and for most Egyptians, that means hauling water back to your mud brick house. Water jars balanced precariously on your head, you walk back, trying to avoid stepping on any sharp stones while you dodge the midday heat that's already started to melt you into the sand. It's a ritual. It's spiritual. And it's absolutely traumatic. The Nile may feed you, clean you, and quench your thirst, but it's no spa day. By now you've bathed, scrubbed off some of the worst, and manage to drink your fill from the sacred yet suspect Nile. Time for breakfast. Except in ancient Egypt, the term breakfast is a bit of a stretch. If you were hoping for a hearty meal to kickstart your day, you're about to be seriously disappointed. Breakfast is less about indulgence and more about survival. You sit down on a low stool, or, if you're lucky, you squat in the corner, and prepare for a meal that's far from glamorous. First, the main event, bread. But this isn't your soft, fluffy bakery loaf, no. This is dense, coarse, and so true it could double as a tool for grinding grain. Made from emmer wheat or barley and baked in clay ovens, which may or may not have been used by local rats for their own purposes, this bread is essentially a rock in loaf form. And let's not forget the occasional bit of sand embedded in your slice, courtesy of the grinding stones. A crunchy surprise that adds some extra minerals to your diet. Alongside this gourmet delight, you'll be drinking beer, but not the crisp, cold, refreshing kind you're probably envisioning. No, this is thick, cloudy, lukewarm, and looks more like porridge than anything resembling a drink. It's brewed from fermented grains, full of calories, and let's just say, it's not going to win any taste awards. But here's the twist, it's safer to drink than water. At least the fermentation process eliminates some of the parasites that could be lurking in the Nile. So, it's not about enjoying a beverage, it's about staying alive. And if you're lucky, very lucky, you might get a few onions or dried dates to go with your meal, though protein is rare unless someone managed to catch a fish and didn't eat it raw. As you chew on your gritty bread and sip your murky, bread-flavored beverage, you're not alone. Flies are buzzing around you, which, of course, they think is an all-you-can-eat buffet. You'll swat them away with one hand while holding your cup with the other, trying not to think too hard about the fact that this is probably the best meal you'll have all day. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't about pleasure, it's about function. It's fuel to keep you going until the next meal, which, let's be honest, probably won't be any better. But hey, at least you're not starving, yet. That said, you better not get too comfortable, because it's time to work. And trust me, labor in ancient Egypt makes modern burnout look like a vacation. Unless you're a scribe, priest, or royalty, none of which you are, your day is filled with backbreaking work, sweat, and very little time for rest. Alright, you've managed to choke down your gritty breakfast, and now, it's time for work. Cue the grand spectacle of ancient Egyptian labor. If you think your job is tough today, let me take you back to a time when your whole existence was basically a 24/7 grind under the burning sun. No cushy office jobs here, unless you're part of the elite class, like a scribe or a priest, which, spoiler alert, you're not. So, brace yourself for what's ahead. If you're a farmer, your day starts before sunrise. You'll be in the fields, ankle-deep in mud, trying to wrestle weeds from the soil or plant barley to ensure there's food for the next season. You don't get fancy tools either, just a wooden plow, some crude sickles, and your bare hands. The sun isn't kind, but your overseer is even less so. He's got a knack for yelling at you while making sure you know you're under constant scrutiny. The rest of your day involves hauling, bending, and sweating until your body just wants to give up, but you don't have that luxury. Because if you stop, you fall behind. If you fall behind, someone else will take your spot, and that's a risk you're not willing to take. If you're a laborer, the day gets even grimmer. Imagine hauling massive stones for the construction of temples or pyramids. You're barefoot, working your way up ramps made of gravel, with no safety measures whatsoever. Trip and you're looking at a broken ankle, with no sympathy from the foreman. This is no cushy job. Every stone you move brings you one step closer to completing one of the greatest architectural feats in human history, but you know full well you won't be around to see the finished product. You're just a cog in the massive machine that is ancient Egyptian construction. Working on tombs? Now, that's a whole new level of physical labor. You're chiseling limestone with nothing but a hammer and chisel, carving out burial chambers for the rich and powerful. But don't make a mistake. If you mess up a pharaoh's tomb, you're looking at far worse than just losing your job. Think more along the lines of getting sealed in a tomb yourself, alive. And that's if you're lucky. Women? They're not exempt from the grueling work either. Grinding grain, hauling water, weaving linen, caring for children, and still managing to help in the fields. Forget me time. The closest you'll get is when the baby naps for a few minutes. You eat on the go, wiping sweat from your brow with your tunic and continuing the cycle. And guess what? That's your life. There's no clocking out in ancient Egypt. The sun is your supervisor, and it demands constant effort. When it finally sinks behind the horizon, you can crawl home, exhausted and covered in dust, dreaming of something as simple as a comfortable bed or a moment's rest. But of course, don't dare complain. In ancient Egypt, complaining could be seen as a crime against the divine order. Your boss? Not just a regular ruler, he's the pharaoh, a living god. The pharaoh embodies the very authority of the cosmos. His rule is divine, and questioning it is blasphemy. Speak ill of him, and you risk divine punishment, or worse, a painful public execution. The pharaoh's image is everywhere, in temples, statues, and even on bread molds. You'll never actually meet him face to face, but you'll spend your entire life working in his name. If the Nile floods, it's his blessing. If it doesn't, well, you just didn't pray hard enough. And forget about rebellion. Even the thought of rising up against the pharaoh could get you killed. The last village that withheld taxes? It no longer exists. In ancient Egypt, work isn't just about making a living. It's about surviving the constant, grinding pressure of a system that demands absolute devotion to a divine authority. So, keep your head down, keep your back bent, and keep moving forward. The gods are watching, and they expect nothing less than complete obedience. If you thought surviving the heat, the Nile, and the grueling labor was the worst part of your day, then think again. Because in ancient Egypt, the worst part of living wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was the mental and spiritual weight of answering to the gods, and more specifically, to the pharaoh. See, the pharaoh isn't just your king. He's the embodiment of Horus, the son of Ra, and chosen by the heavens to maintain Ma'at, the divine cosmic order that keeps everything running smoothly. And in Egypt, nothing, not even the tiniest inconvenience, happens without the pharaoh's divine blessing, or curse. As you move through your day, it's impossible to escape his presence. His image is everywhere, on statues, murals, and even on the bread you eat. He's more than a ruler. He's your connection to the gods, your direct link to the divine. And that's a heavy responsibility to bear. If things go well, you thank Ra and the pharaoh. If things go wrong, well, maybe you didn't pray hard enough or offer enough sacrifices. Either way, you live in a world where even the tiniest mistake could be seen as a sign of disrespect to the gods. And disrespecting the gods? That's not just a bad idea, it's downright dangerous. The system that governs your life is designed to remind you constantly of the pharaoh's divinity. You work in his name, you live in his name, and you pray in his name. He's the divine ruler, and questioning his authority isn't just taboo, it's potentially treasonous. In fact, speaking ill of the pharaoh could get you in serious trouble. The penalty? Well, it's not exactly a slap on the wrist. You could be whipped, thrown in chains, or worse, sent to the underworld, with none of your favorite burial goods. But even in this system of unquestionable power, you don't get to see the pharaoh up close. He lives in a palace far removed from your humble existence, surrounded by priests, scribes, and officials. The only time you might catch a glimpse of him is during a religious festival, when his golden bark, his divine boat, floats down the Nile. You're not meant to interact with him directly. His role is sacred, distant, untouchable. You are simply a subject, a part of the grand cosmic order that the pharaoh is responsible for maintaining. And let's be clear, the pharaoh doesn't do anything without divine approval. His every move is a manifestation of Ra's will. When the Nile floods and the harvests are good, it's seen as the pharaoh's blessing. When disaster strikes, whether it's famine, disease, or drought, it's a sign that the gods are angry, and you must atone for your sins. There's no room for error in this system, and there's no room for questioning your place in it. Everything, from the way you work to the way you pray, is dictated by the will of the gods, with the pharaoh acting as their earthly representative. But here's the twist: in this system, you don't even get to be a true individual. Your life is one of conformity to the greater cosmic order. The role of each person in society is rigidly defined. If you're born into a family of farmers, that's your lot. If you're born into a family of laborers, then that's what you'll do. The same applies to women. Their roles are clearly defined, and while they have more rights than women in other ancient cultures, their lives are still dictated by societal expectations and their devotion to the gods. You'll work, you'll pray, you'll sacrifice, and you'll do it all in the name of the pharaoh. And don't even think about rebellion. Any form of resistance to the pharaoh's divine rule is considered blasphemy. If you were part of a rebellion that failed, well, it's likely your entire village would be wiped out. Uprisings are crushed with a swift, merciless hand. Egypt's rulers don't just maintain control through power, they maintain it through fear and divine authority. The very thought of defying the pharaoh is so dangerous that it's unthinkable for most. Because when you're living in a world where the pharaoh is the direct intermediary between you and the gods, to rebel isn't just an act of defiance, it's a cosmic betrayal. In short, life in ancient Egypt isn't just about surviving the heat, the labor, and the risks of everyday life. It's about surviving under the unyielding authority of the pharaoh. Your entire existence revolves around his divine mandate, and stepping out of line could cost you everything. There's no escaping the pharaoh's shadow. He is both your king and your god, and your survival depends entirely on your unwavering loyalty to him and the cosmic order he represents. You've made it through another brutal day in ancient Egypt, sweating under the hot sun, working the fields, grinding grain, and possibly even dodging a snake or two. But here's the kicker: what makes it all even worse is that there's one thing you can't escape: sand. It's not just a nuisance. In Egypt, sand is your constant companion. It follows you everywhere. It gets into your clothes, your food, your home. There's no place safe from it. You wake up in it, walk through it, eat it, and even sleep with it. It's like a permanent resident in your life, and there's no eviction in sight. Let's start with your clothes, shall we? Linen is the fabric of choice, and for good reason. It's light and breathable, perfect for the scorching Egyptian sun. But here's the problem: it's about as effective at keeping sand out as a screen door is at keeping out a summer breeze. The moment you step outside, the sand sticks to your linen tunic like it's made of Velcro. It slides down your body, clings to your skin, and somehow finds its way into places you never thought possible. You might as well be walking around in a sand trap. At least when you're working, the dust that gets in your lungs gives you something to focus on. Now eating? Yeah, good luck with that. Every loaf of bread you eat, no matter how carefully you break it off, has a little extra ingredient: sand. Because the wheat is ground in stone mills, the flour often carries grains of grit. You can't avoid it. It's like your daily dose of extra minerals, though you didn't exactly sign up for it. The result? Worn-down teeth. Seriously, archaeological studies show that ancient Egyptians had some serious dental wear, mostly because of all that sand mixed into their bread. They didn't exactly have the finest toothbrushes or dental hygiene routines, and if you end up with a toothache, you're either living with it or hoping a healer can work some magic. And your home? Well, it's no safe haven from the sand either. Your mud brick house might offer shelter, but it's not airtight. The sand blows in through the cracks in the walls and the open windows, making sure you're never far from your gritty companion. You might think that your bed could provide relief, but no. Your straw mattress? It's practically a sand trap in itself. Even your cooking pots, wherever you put them, sand seems to sneak its way in, adding a little crunch to your stew. Now, if you're lucky, maybe you'll get a pair of sandals made from reeds. But even they are no match for the hot sand beneath your feet. Most people, if they don't have sandals, just walk barefoot, which means every step is like a tiny battle against the scorching earth below. You're constantly aware of every sharp rock, every grain of sand sticking to your skin. And the worst? Sandstorms. When they hit, it's like a slap from the gods themselves. One minute, you're walking down the street, and the next, the wind whips up, and you're blinded by the sand flying everywhere. Your face feels like it's been run over by a desert tornado, and you can't see anything. All you can do is hunker down and hope it passes quickly, though you know deep down, it might not. In ancient Egypt, sand isn't just an inconvenience, it's a constant, nagging reminder that the desert owns you. Whether you're working, eating, sleeping, or walking, sand is right there with you, like an unwanted guest who won't leave. And it doesn't matter where you go. You can't escape it. But somehow, this constant battle with sand becomes part of your reality. You learn to live with it. It's as much a part of your day as the work, the prayers, and the relentless heat. There's no getting away from sand, it's always with you. And honestly, in ancient Egypt, survival isn't just about enduring the heat and the work, it's about learning how to live with the harsh realities of your environment, sand included. If you thought the endless battles with the sun, sand, and daily survival were the toughest parts of your life in ancient Egypt, think again. There's one more thing you have to contend with, something far more spiritual and ever-present, the gods. The ancient Egyptian gods weren't just stories or distant figures. They were woven into every single aspect of your life. Your job, your meals, your home, and even your rest were governed by the will of these powerful beings. And in Egypt, religion wasn't something you did on Sundays or during festivals. It was an operating system that ran everything. You wake up to the relentless sun each day, but Ra, the sun god, isn't just a fiery orb in the sky. He's the king of all gods, and his power is everywhere. Before you even start your day, you must acknowledge him. Ra moves the sun across the sky, and it's his blessing that determines the good harvests, the flooding of the Nile, and well, everything else in your world. In fact, you might find yourself saying a prayer to Ra every time you step outside, because to ignore him is to risk invoking his wrath. After all, it's his light that burns you alive every day, so it might just be a good idea to keep him happy. But Ra isn't the only god you must appease. Egypt's gods are as varied as the tasks you perform. Sobek, the crocodile god, is the protector of the Nile and all its creatures. He controls the river, and that's a big deal, considering the Nile is both your lifeline and, quite frankly, your toilet. So, you'd better make sure you don't anger Sobek, especially considering the fact that one wrong move around the river could see you swimming with a crocodile. Then there's Batet, the cat goddess, who's the protector of home and hearth. In a world where cats are revered and often treated with the same respect as deities, it's no surprise that cats are sacred. You might find yourself making offerings to Batet, ensuring that your family is protected from evil spirits, and maybe even asking her for a little peace from the constant bombardment of flies and sand. And then there's Anubis, the god of the dead, who controls the passage to the afterlife. You don't have to worry about him just yet, unless you've already started to make a few bad decisions, but rest assured, he's a constant presence. His protection is required for a peaceful afterlife, so if you're looking to ensure a smooth transition when your time comes, Anubis is definitely someone you want on your side. Your daily life is a constant balancing act of pleasing these gods, because the ancient Egyptians believed that the balance of the cosmos was directly linked to the divine. The concept of Ma'at, which represents truth, justice, and cosmic order, isn't just a philosophical idea, it's a practical one. Every act, from the way you farm to how you speak to the gods, is an effort to maintain Ma'at. If the gods are happy and Ma'at is upheld, the world runs smoothly. If the gods are displeased, however, chaos will reign, and that's something no one wants. Religion, however, wasn't just a personal affair. The pharaoh, as the living god, was the mediator between the divine and the people. He was responsible for ensuring that Ma'at was maintained. His role wasn't just to rule, it was to uphold the order of the universe. Every action of the pharaoh was divinely guided, and as his subject, you were expected to follow his lead. When the pharaoh decreed that a temple be built, it wasn't just an architectural project, it was a cosmic necessity. Every brick laid was a prayer. Every column raised was a gesture of devotion. You didn't just work for the pharaoh, you worked for the gods. And when the pharaoh ordered a grand feast or a ritual sacrifice, it wasn't just to appease his own ego. It was to ensure the gods remained satisfied and that Ma'at was preserved. But this belief system wasn't just something that happened in temples. It was everywhere. The gods were in your home, in your food, and in every prayer you offered. They were part of your daily rituals, and in many ways they shaped who you were. You weren't just a farmer, a builder, or a laborer, you were a servant to the gods, and your life's meaning came from fulfilling that divine role. Your work wasn't just for your family or your village, it was part of a larger cosmic purpose. But let's not pretend it's all serenity. Because ancient Egyptian religion also involved some pretty intense rituals. Every year, the Egyptians would perform grand festivals and sacrifices to keep the gods happy. Priests, who were often the most powerful members of society, led these ceremonies, and their role was critical. They didn't just offer prayers, they ensured that the gods' will was followed. Temples were massive centers of power, and the priests who worked in them were the closest thing to politicians you'd ever see. In some cases, the gods demanded sacrifices. Not just offerings of food or incense, but real, human sacrifices. These were rare but happened during times of crisis or when the gods required it. The act of sacrifice wasn't seen as barbaric, it was seen as a necessary part of keeping Ma'at intact. To the ancient Egyptians, this was the way to ensure the continued stability of the cosmos. So, you see, life in ancient Egypt isn't just about the physical labor, the sweltering heat, or the unbearable sandstorms. It's about living in a world where the gods are as real and present as the Nile itself. Every day is a delicate dance of survival and devotion, and if you falter, the consequences aren't just personal, they're cosmic. Now that we've covered the constant spiritual surveillance from the gods, let's talk about one of the more critical parts of your existence, the afterlife. In ancient Egypt, death wasn't just an end, it was a transition, a bureaucratic process that required all the right steps, prayers, and rituals. And guess what? The Egyptians didn't leave anything to chance. Your daily life might be filled with work, sand, and sweat, but your afterlife? Well, that's something that takes just as much preparation. When you die, your body must be preserved for eternity. This is where mummification comes in. The Egyptians were masters of embalming. First, they removed your internal organs to prevent decay, because nothing says eternal life like getting rid of your stomach and intestines. They then stuff your body with natron, a type of salt that dries you out and keeps things from getting gross. After that, your body would be wrapped in linen, adorned with amulets, and placed in a tomb with offerings, food, and sometimes even personal items, like jewelry and statues. But for the elite, this wasn't just any tomb. You got a nice, fancy one, probably with some pretty wild carvings and maybe even a few small servant figurines called shabdas. These little figures were like spiritual interns, there to serve you in the afterlife while you got some well-deserved rest. But here's the catch: getting into the afterlife isn't guaranteed. It's not just about making sure your body's intact and well-equipped. No. You have to prove you were good enough to get past the judgment of the gods. And who better to judge you than Anubis, the god of the dead? Anubis oversees your journey to the afterlife, where your heart will be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If your heart is light, meaning you lived a righteous life, you get the green light to pass into the field of reeds, a paradise that mirrors Egypt, where you'll live forever in peace and joy. But if your heart is heavier than the feather, if you've lied, cheated, or committed wrongs that can't be erased, you face a much darker fate. You're thrown to Ammit, a terrifying creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. And let me tell you, Ammit doesn't just send you to your next life, she eats your soul, ensuring you're gone for good. Eternal non-existence. Poof. Gone. That's right. In ancient Egypt, death isn't just about a funeral procession and a big tomb, it's about a cosmic court case. You stand before the gods, and your heart must pass the test of Ma'at. One slip up, one wrong confession, and you're done. If your heart's too heavy, no amount of embalming or offerings will save you. But if you've lived a virtuous life, if you've followed the laws of Ma'at, you pass through. You'll enter the field of reeds, where you're reunited with your loved ones. Here, you can farm without toil, feast without hunger, and sail the Nile in peace. This is the ultimate reward, but don't get too comfortable. Life isn't that simple. The gods, especially Osiris, expect you to maintain Ma'at even after death. The idea of eternal peace is tied to living a righteous, balanced life. Your afterlife isn't a vacation, it's a continuation of your devotion. Now, for most commoners, your afterlife is a little less flashy. You won't have gold statues or intricate tombs. You're lucky if your family can afford a proper burial. Your body might be wrapped hastily in linen, and your tomb could be little more than a shallow pit in the sand. But even the poorest Egyptians believed in the promise of the afterlife, and despite having little wealth in life, they held on to the hope that they would live eternally in the field of reeds, surrounded by their family, in a world free from the struggles of daily survival. But don't forget, you have to be judged, and if you didn't follow the rules, there's no coming back. The gods of the afterlife don't mess around. They've seen it all, everything from the smallest lie to the most heinous crime, and they're not letting anyone pass through unless they've proven their worth. This entire process was taken so seriously that the Book of the Dead was created as a guide for the deceased. It's not a book about doom and gloom, it's more like a spiritual cheat sheet, full of prayers, spells, and instructions on how to navigate the underworld and avoid getting eaten by Ammit. The Egyptians were nothing if not prepared. They didn't just face death, they planned for it. They knew that the gods were watching, and they worked hard to ensure that they wouldn't be devoured by some mythical creature on their way to the afterlife. So, whether you're a laborer in life or an elite, one thing is clear: in ancient Egypt, death is never a simple thing. It's a journey, a test, and a cosmic balancing act. And if you don't make it through, well, don't say I didn't warn you. By now, you've learned that surviving in ancient Egypt is no small feat. Between the unrelenting sun, the sand that never leaves, the gods who are always watching, and the daily labor that stretches your endurance to its limits, life is a constant test of physical and mental resilience. But the one thing that offers any respite from this harsh existence? Religion. And while it might seem like an endless cycle of rituals, prayers, and sacrifices, it's also the thread that holds society together. Religion provides meaning in a world that often feels like it's spinning out of control, and it offers hope that, despite everything, there's something beyond this brutal, fleeting life. You're not just going through the motions of work, sweat, and survival. Everything has a spiritual significance. The ancient Egyptians didn't just work the land to eat, they worked the land to honor the gods. The crops you plant, the grains you grind, the bricks you carry, all of it is tied to the divine. The most powerful men in Egypt, the pharaohs, understand this better than anyone. They are not merely rulers, they are the living embodiments of the gods themselves. Their divine status means that they are the ones who ensure that Ma'at, the balance of the universe, remains intact. If they falter, so does Egypt, and the gods could very well bring about chaos in response. In ancient Egypt, everything was connected by this sacred cosmic order. The Nile? It wasn't just a river, it was a gift from the gods. The sun? It wasn't just weather, it was Ra's divine presence that could either bless or scorch the land. And you, the people, aren't merely workers. You are participants in this grand cosmic drama. Every offering you make, every prayer you recite, and every temple you build is part of a larger plan to maintain Ma'at. But this doesn't just apply to the temples or the grand state rituals. It's a personal commitment too. Each home has its own shrine, its own set of small, daily prayers, and rituals meant to honor the gods. You make offerings to the household deities, to protect your family and ensure that your crops grow. When a baby is born, it's not just a joyous occasion, it's a time to make sure that the gods bless the newborn and keep it safe from illness and evil spirits. Still, it's hard not to feel the weight of it all. After all, you're constantly being reminded that your survival is dependent on a complex, unseen system of gods, rituals, and balance. The gods demand loyalty, but they also offer protection. The pharaoh's divine rule requires unwavering faith, but in return, you get the privilege of living under their guidance, with the assurance that the universe won't descend into chaos, at least, not as long as you keep up your part of the deal. Even in your everyday interactions, the gods are present. When you go about your work, it's not just for sustenance, it's for the gods. When you wake up in the morning, you're not simply getting out of bed, you're starting a day of devotion. You pray to Ra as you step outside, thanking him for another day of life. You make your offerings at your local temple, where priests perform the divine rituals on your behalf. You hope that your deeds align with the God's will, that your actions maintain Ma'at, and that you, too, will be judged worthy of a peaceful afterlife. But here's the twist: even with all this preparation, devotion, and faith, you can never truly be sure of your fate. In ancient Egypt, the gods didn't promise anyone an easy life, and they didn't promise anyone salvation. Even the pharaoh, the living god, faced challenges, dangers, and the constant reminder that maintaining Ma'at was a never-ending responsibility. But still, you perform your duties. You work, you sacrifice, you pray, because it's all part of the divine order. It's how the world works. This cosmic system is both a source of strength and a heavy burden. On the one hand, it provides meaning in an often brutal and difficult existence. On the other hand, it's a constant reminder that your life is not entirely your own. Your actions, your choices, and your survival are all dictated by the gods and the cosmic order they maintain. But through it all, one thing remains clear: your devotion, your role in the grand scheme of things, and your place in the world are critical to keeping Ma'at intact. Without it, chaos could follow. And that's a fate no one in ancient Egypt wants to face. Now, as we've seen, life in ancient Egypt is a delicate balance between work, spirituality, and survival, but there's something else that adds an extra layer of complexity to your existence: the very fabric of society itself. In ancient Egypt, your life isn't just about you. It's about the community, the pharaoh, and the gods. And as much as we'd like to think we have the power to shape our own destinies, in Egypt, your destiny is shaped by your position in the social hierarchy. For most people, that means you're likely born into a specific role, and unless you're one of the fortunate few, you'll spend your life fulfilling that role without much hope of rising above it. If you're born a farmer, you will farm. If you're born a laborer, you will labor. The aristocracy, the scribes, and the priests? They're the ones who have a bit of leeway in this system, but they're also the ones with the most responsibility. They're the ones who interpret the will of the gods, who manage the temples, and who oversee the intricate bureaucracy of the nation. But for you, you'll likely be working in the fields, the quarries, or the bustling markets, just trying to get by. The social structure of ancient Egypt isn't as rigid as, say, the caste system in India, but it's still deeply stratified. The pharaoh sits at the very top, followed by priests, scribes, and other officials who wield power and influence. These are the people who make the decisions, who have access to the resources, and who interact with the gods on your behalf. And then, below them, you have the common people, the farmers, the laborers, the artisans. These are the people who build Egypt, who grow the food, and who make the goods that fuel the economy. You might be a laborer working on a grand temple, or you might be an artisan crafting pottery or jewelry, but your life is one of service, one of working for the benefit of the elite. But let's be clear, this system isn't all bad. Yes, it's harsh. Yes, it can feel like you're trapped in a cycle of labor and devotion. But in ancient Egypt, the idea of social mobility, while limited, did exist. If you were a skilled artisan or a successful merchant, you might rise through the ranks and gain the favor of the pharaoh or the priests. A good scribe might find himself promoted to a higher position, or a particularly skilled worker might be rewarded with land or other privileges. But for the vast majority, your life is defined by your role. If you're born into a poor family, you'll likely stay poor. Your children will inherit your status and continue the cycle. If you're born a noble, you'll enjoy a life of luxury, surrounded by servants and riches. And if you're born a pharaoh, well, the gods have already chosen you, and your destiny is written in the stars. But there's one more crucial point in this social structure: religion. Your devotion to the gods is what legitimizes the entire system. The pharaoh is the divine ruler, and his role is justified by the gods. In a sense, the gods are the ultimate enforcers of this social order. Without the gods' blessings, there is no peace, no prosperity, no Ma'at. The gods sanction the rule of the pharaoh, and in turn, the pharaoh ensures that everyone works to uphold the divine order. You are expected to fulfill your role, whether it's as a laborer, a farmer, or a scribe, because it is your divine duty. And if you don't, you risk angering the gods, which could throw the entire system into chaos. It's easy to look at this system and think it's a trap. And in many ways it is. The reality for most people in ancient Egypt was one of hard labor, limited opportunities, and little freedom. But at the same time, it's also a system that gives meaning to life. The gods are watching, yes, but they're also guiding. The pharaoh is powerful, yes, but his role is divinely sanctioned. The work you do isn't just for survival, it's for the gods. Every brick you lay, every crop you harvest, every prayer you utter is part of a greater cosmic plan. You may not have control over your position in society, but you do have control over your devotion, your work, and your ability to fulfill your divine duties. And so, while the social structure of ancient Egypt can seem stifling, there's an underlying sense of purpose that comes with it. Your life has meaning because you are part of a larger system. You are contributing to the divine order. And even if you're a laborer or a farmer, your work is just as important as the pharaoh's. It's all part of a grand design, a system that spans from the gods to the everyday people, from the pharaoh's palace to the mud brick homes along the Nile. Still, it's hard to deny that the hierarchy creates inequality. You're at the mercy of the gods, the pharaoh, and the social structure. Your fate is largely sealed at birth, and while you may rise in status through skill or luck, the majority of people in ancient Egypt lived and died within the limits of their social class. And that's a reality that you just have to accept. The gods are watching, the pharaoh is ruling, and you are working to keep the divine order in place. There's no escaping that. We've covered the sun, sand, gods, and rigid social structure of ancient Egypt, but now it's time to talk about something that often gets overlooked in the chaos of daily life: your body. And let me tell you, in ancient Egypt, your body wasn't just a vessel for living, it was a temple in itself, both literally and metaphorically. But unlike today, when we've got doctors, medicine, and a certain level of comfort, your body's health in ancient Egypt was a lot more about belief, magic, and sometimes sheer luck. Let's start with the basics: hygiene. If you were lucky enough to live in a city like Thebes or Memphis, you might get access to a communal bathing area. But if you lived outside the city, you'd probably be bathing in the Nile River, an activity that sounds better in theory than it actually is. The river is sacred, sure, but it's also the place where everything from livestock waste to the bodies of the deceased float by. Not exactly the spa experience you might imagine. And if you were a woman or a child, it's not like you had the privacy of your own bathroom. Public baths were just that, public. So, no escaping the crowds or the occasional awkward glance from a neighbor. Washing your clothes wasn't any more glamorous either. Instead of just tossing them into a washing machine, you'd head down to the Nile, armed with a rock in the hope that the crocodiles wouldn't mistake your laundry for a snack. Clothes were scrubbed against stones, a form of cleaning that left just as much dirt as it took away. And let's not forget sand, the ancient Egyptian version of glitter. It got into everything, from your bed to your food. You could scrub all day, but it was like trying to sweep up water. The sand just wouldn't stop coming. Now, let's talk about health and medicine. No antibiotics, no painkillers, and certainly no quick fixes for those who were feeling under the weather. But what the Egyptians did have was a fascinating combination of herbal remedies, magic, and belief in the gods. And don't underestimate the power of belief. When you're surrounded by so many gods, it's easy to think that a little magic might work wonders. Doctors in ancient Egypt were skilled in some ways, but their methods were often intertwined with spells and prayers. You'd visit a physician not only for a prescription of herbs but also for a chant that would make the gods smile upon your ailments. Take, for example, the treatment for headaches. Instead of a bottle of aspirin, you'd find yourself getting a dose of crushed onions rubbed into your scalp. A little stinky, but effective, right? And if you had an eye infection, well, get ready for some lizard blood mixed with ochre, because that's what the healer would use to make a paste to rub over your sore eyes. It wasn't pleasant, but it was their best shot. You also had dental care, or the lack thereof. You know how we brush our teeth twice a day with fancy toothpaste? Yeah, in ancient Egypt, you'd get a little sand mixed in with your bread, courtesy of the grinding process. It was like nature's own version of sandpaper. But if you had a toothache, your options were limited to either living with the pain or having the tooth pulled out with something resembling pliers. Not the most comforting thought, especially when you consider that your teeth would already be worn down from all that sand in your bread. But despite the primitive tools, the Egyptians were masters at what we'd consider to be some impressive medical procedures. They had an understanding of anatomy and were capable of setting broken bones, draining abscesses, and even performing some surgeries. However, there were no fancy machines, no sterilized tools, and certainly no anesthesia. A patient undergoing surgery would need to have a friend hold them down while the doctor went to work, all without the benefit of modern pain relief. For women, childbirth was a dangerous affair. There was no epidural to ease the pain, no sterile surgical rooms to ensure safety, and no emergency room where you could rush for help. Childbirth was done at home, with midwives present to guide the process, but that didn't mean it was safe. Infection was a constant threat, and complications could lead to death, either for the mother or the child. Women were encouraged to pray to the goddess Tauret, the protector of childbirth, in hopes of a safe delivery. But for most women, giving birth was a deeply spiritual experience that required more faith than medicine. And that's the thing about health in ancient Egypt. It wasn't just about what you ate or how you took care of your body. It was also about the gods. When you felt sick, you weren't just sick because of bad food or a misstep. You were sick because one of the gods was upset with you. And healing wasn't just about medicine. It was about appeasing the divine forces. Priests would perform rituals to invoke the gods' favor, and you'd find yourself making offerings or saying prayers in hopes of receiving divine intervention. If all else failed, there were always amulets. These magical charms were believed to protect you from illness, bad luck, and even evil spirits. Some of the most common amulets were shaped like gods and were carried around to keep their divine protection close. If you were a woman giving birth, you'd probably wear an amulet of Tauret, the hippo goddess who protected women in labor. If you were a soldier going into battle, you'd wear an amulet of Horus to keep you safe from harm. These amulets didn't just serve as jewelry, they were your insurance policy against the dangers of life. So, while medicine in ancient Egypt was far from what we have today, it wasn't all bad. The Egyptians had some effective treatments, especially when it came to surgery and bone setting. But much of it relied on their understanding of the spiritual world, where gods controlled everything, from your health to your fate in the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed that your body, like everything else in life, was under divine influence. If you were lucky, you'd stay healthy enough to work and pray, and maybe even live long enough to enjoy a peaceful afterlife. But no matter how hard you worked or how careful you were, the gods were the ultimate doctors. And sometimes the best you could do was trust them to guide you through it all. As we've seen, surviving in ancient Egypt wasn't for the faint of heart. Between the overwhelming heat, the unyielding sand, the laborious work, and the constant spiritual devotion required to maintain balance, it's safe to say that life was a full-body commitment. But despite the harshness of daily life, one thing remained constant: human creativity, especially when it came to art, architecture, and craftsmanship. While much of Egypt's grandeur is focused on its monuments, temples, and tombs, the Egyptians weren't just masters of the grand and monumental. They were equally skilled at crafting small, personal objects that reflected their spiritual devotion and everyday life. Let's start with architecture. When you think of ancient Egypt, the first thing that probably comes to mind is the pyramid. These massive stone structures were not just tombs, they were symbols of divine power, cosmic order, and the afterlife. Built to house the pharaohs and their treasures, these pyramids were meant to stand for eternity, acting as both a physical and spiritual bridge between the mortal world and the gods. But it wasn't just the pharaohs who had grand tombs. Even ordinary Egyptians wanted to secure a spot in the afterlife, which led to the construction of smaller tombs, sometimes decorated with beautiful murals, carvings, and inscriptions. For the common folk, the afterlife was just as important, but it was often simpler. Tombs were often no more than small pits dug into the desert floor, marked by a few simple stones. Yet, even in these humble burials, you'd find evidence of the belief in life after death. Many tombs contained amulets, small statues of gods, and even food offerings. These were meant to ensure a safe passage into the afterlife, to feed the deceased in their next life, and to provide spiritual protection along the way. The tombs of the elite might have contained elaborate murals depicting scenes from the deceased's life, often showing the deceased in an eternal state of enjoyment, receiving offerings, or participating in religious rituals. The art wasn't just decoration, it was part of the process of securing a peaceful afterlife. But Egyptian craftsmanship wasn't limited to tombs and statues. The Egyptians were also skilled in creating jewelry, cosmetics, and everyday household items that reflected both beauty and function. For the wealthy, jewelry was a sign of status and divine favor. Gold, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and other precious stones were used to create intricate necklaces, bracelets, rings, and earrings. Many of these pieces were not just for decoration, they were imbued with magical significance. For example, amulets shaped like the scarab beetle were often worn to ward off evil spirits and bring good luck. The scarab symbolized regeneration and protection, and it was a powerful emblem in Egyptian society. For the common folk, jewelry was less elaborate but still important. Beads, stones, and simple metalwork were used to craft items like bracelets, necklaces, and rings. These were worn as personal adornment, yes, but they also had spiritual significance. Many people wore charms to protect themselves from illness, bad luck, or evil forces. The Egyptians believed in the power of the gods to shape their lives, and they used their jewelry as a way to keep those gods close, to ensure divine protection throughout their daily struggles. Speaking of daily life, let's move on to the objects you'd use every day. The Egyptians were masters of practical design. If you worked in a shop or a market, you'd probably have a clay jar or a wooden bowl for carrying goods, making offerings, or storing food. These items were simple but well crafted, designed for function and longevity. And don't forget the linens. You might have worn a simple linen tunic to protect yourself from the heat, but Egyptians were also skilled weavers. Fine linen was prized, and it was used to make everything from clothing to bed linens to wraps for mummies. The fact that so many ancient Egyptian linen artifacts have survived thousands of years is a testament to the quality of craftsmanship. Then, of course, there's the iconic Egyptian pottery. Whether it's for daily use in the home, for making offerings in the temple, or for decorating a tomb, pottery played a huge role in ancient Egyptian life. The pottery was typically made from clay, shaped by hand or on a wheel, and then fired in a kiln. Many pieces were decorated with symbols or images of gods, animals, and scenes from daily life. Some pottery was even designed to carry the essence of the gods themselves, serving as a physical representation of divine presence. The Egyptians were also skilled in metalworking. Gold, bronze, and copper were used to make tools, weapons, and decorative items. The art of creating metal objects was highly prized, and the process of working with metal was seen as a divine skill. Metal objects, whether they were tools used in daily life or items made for temples and tombs, were often crafted with incredible precision and attention to detail. Even something as simple as a metal knife or a spearhead could be engraved with symbols or images of gods, ensuring that the gods were invoked and their blessings sought. In addition to all these physical objects, ancient Egyptians were also incredibly skilled in the world of writing and record-keeping. Hieroglyphs, the ancient Egyptian writing system, were a beautiful and complex way of documenting everything from religious texts to historical records to daily transactions. If you were a scribe, your job wasn't just to write, it was to communicate with the divine. Writing wasn't simply about recording the events of the day. It was about capturing the will of the gods, about ensuring that Ma'at, the cosmic order, was maintained. A well-crafted inscription was thought to carry a power of its own, and the gods themselves were believed to be present in the written word. Through all these forms of craftsmanship, whether in grand monuments, personal jewelry, or everyday objects, the ancient Egyptians expressed a deep belief in the sacredness of life, death, and everything in between. They understood that everything, from the tombs of the pharaohs to the humble pottery of the peasants, was part of a divine order. Their artistry, whether grand or simple, was an offering to the gods, a way to ensure that Ma'at, the cosmic balance, was preserved. As we've journeyed through the intense demands of survival, spiritual devotion, and creative craftsmanship in ancient Egypt, let's now focus on something a little more exhilarating: festivals, feasts, and the moments of celebration that brought some balance to the otherwise grueling daily grind. After all, you can't be constantly hauling stones, grinding grain, and appeasing gods without some form of respite, right? And in ancient Egypt, that respite often came in the form of religious festivals, royal celebrations, and communal gatherings that allowed people to unwind, enjoy life, and take part in rituals meant to honor the gods. One of the most significant festivals in ancient Egypt was the Opet festival, held annually in Thebes, dedicated to Ammonius, the king of the gods. This festival was like the ancient Egyptian version of a giant block party, only with more prayers and sacrifices than your average modern-day celebration. The Opet festival centered around the most sacred of processions. The statue of Ammonius, along with those of his consort Mut and their son Khonsu, were carried from the Karnak temple to the Luxor temple in a grand procession. Imagine a giant parade, but instead of floats, it's the divine statues that are paraded through the streets, surrounded by chants, songs, and the scent of burning incense. The streets would be lined with people singing and dancing, welcoming the gods into the heart of the city. For many Egyptians, this was one of the few occasions when they could see the gods' representations up close, a rare and cherished moment in a world where divine interaction was mostly mediated by priests and royalty. The excitement wasn't just about the procession, it was about the reaffirmation of Egypt's divine favor, the gods ensuring that Ma'at, or cosmic order, would continue for another year. For the people, it was a moment to feel that connection to the divine, to be part of something greater than their daily struggles. But not all festivals were religious. Some were a bit more fun and a lot more indulgent. Feasts were common, especially during the times of the harvest or after the pharaoh's victories. Picture long tables overflowing with bread, dates, vegetables, and fish, alongside the occasional meat dish when the butcher was feeling generous. Wine flowed freely, though it was more akin to a fermented fruit drink than today's crisp wines, and it was often served thick and cloudy, definitely more substance than style. Beer, too, was the drink of choice, a frothy concoction of barley and grain that kept the people hydrated and the mood lively. For the elite, these feasts were extravagant affairs. Imagine sitting on a cushioned chair, being served by servants while attendants offered trays of fine delicacies, dishes you could only dream of during an average day. For the common folk, feasts might be simpler, but they were still an occasion to share a meal with neighbors, laugh together, and relax after the hard work of the harvest. Music was a key element of these celebrations, with musicians playing harps, lyres, and percussion instruments to set the tone, while dancers performed to entertain the crowd. But what about those moments when the Egyptians were just having a good time, outside of religious rituals and royal celebrations? Enter the Sene, a type of festival dedicated to the rejuvenation of the pharaoh, often celebrated every 2 to 3 years. The Sene was a bit of a personal break for the pharaoh himself, as it gave him a chance to take a break from the heavy responsibility of ruling and indulge in some of life's simpler pleasures. It was during the Sene that the pharaoh would partake in athletic competitions, feasting, and sometimes even participate in mock battles, activities that allowed him to recharge and prove his vitality. It was also a time for the people to see the pharaoh in action and to reaffirm his status as the divine ruler, whose strength and health were paramount to the well-being of the entire kingdom. Now, while all these festivals and celebrations are wonderful, let's not forget the grandest of all Egyptian events, the royal coronation. This wasn't just a day for the king to sit on his throne and give speeches. No. The royal coronation was an affair full of processions, feasts, and of course, sacred rituals meant to unite the pharaoh with the gods themselves. During the coronation, the new pharaoh would undergo various rituals, including receiving the double crown, representing Upper and Lower Egypt, before ascending the throne. He was believed to be a living god, and his reign was seen as divinely sanctioned. But even in the midst of these grand rituals, festivals, and celebrations, the reality of everyday life never truly disappeared. You might be dancing at a feast one moment, but when the music stops and the guests depart, you're back to hauling stones, grinding grain, or tending to the fields. The gods may have been celebrated and honored with grand gestures, but for most Egyptians, life was about survival. These festivals and celebrations were not just moments of joy, they were spiritual experiences, a way to reaffirm the relationship between the people and the gods, and between the living and the dead. It's also important to note that festivals were not just about personal enjoyment, they were deeply connected to the agricultural cycles that governed the Egyptians' way of life. For example, the Shema festival, celebrated during the harvest season, was a time to give thanks for the bounty of the land. It marked the end of the planting season and the beginning of the harvest. In a society where the Nile dictated much of life, the festivals that celebrated its annual flooding were crucial to ensuring that the crops grew and that the kingdom thrived. Ultimately, the festivals and feasts of ancient Egypt weren't just diversions from the harshness of daily life. They were integral to the fabric of Egyptian society, reinforcing the connection between humans, the gods, and the natural world. They gave the people of Egypt something to look forward to, even if life in between was filled with work, toil, and struggle. In those brief moments of music, dance, food, and drink, Egyptians could feel a sense of divine favor and unity that made all the hard work worthwhile. By now, you're well aware of the profound daily struggles of life in ancient Egypt, the heat, the labor, the devotion to the gods. But despite all the challenges, one element of Egyptian life continues to stand out as a testament to their resilience and creativity: their remarkable architecture. In a world where the sun beat down relentlessly, where sand constantly found its way into every corner of life, and where survival often seemed like a battle against the elements, the ancient Egyptians built structures that defied the odds and have lasted millennia. Their engineering feats not only redefined architecture for their time but also became a permanent symbol of their civilization's grandeur, ingenuity, and faith. First and foremost, you have to recognize that stone was not the most practical material for construction in a desert. While wood, mud brick, and reeds were more readily available, the Egyptians didn't shy away from using stone, particularly limestone, sandstone, and granite, which were harder to work with and much more expensive to transport. But when it came to monumental architecture, the pyramids, temples, tombs, and obelisks, stone was not just a material, it was a symbol. Stone represented eternity, durability, and divine permanence. The Egyptians believed that their greatest monuments should endure for eternity, just as their souls were meant to do. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza, for example. At over 480 feet tall, this awe-inspiring structure was the tallest man-made building in the world for more than 3,800 years. It's easy to marvel at the pyramid's size, but what's more impressive is the precision with which it was built. The ancient Egyptians didn't have the advanced tools and machinery that we have today, yet they managed to construct this immense structure with such accuracy that even modern engineers are still in awe of their methods. The pyramid is aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, and its dimensions are almost mathematically perfect. To this day, there are debates about the exact methods used to transport the massive stones, each weighing several tons, and how they managed to lift them to such great heights. But one thing is certain: the construction of the pyramids was a monumental feat that showcases the Egyptians' extraordinary skill and foresight. But the pyramids aren't the only iconic structures that define ancient Egyptian architecture. The temples of Egypt were another testament to the civilization's engineering prowess. These vast, sprawling complexes were not only places of worship but also centers of political and economic power. Temples like those at Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel are magnificent examples of how the Egyptians used architecture to honor their gods and celebrate the divine order they so desperately wanted to preserve. The temples were designed to align with celestial events, sunrise, solstices, and the stars, making them not just architectural feats, but also cosmological instruments. They were perfectly positioned to ensure that the gods' power was felt at the right time, in the right place, and in the most spectacular way. Inside these temples, the walls were covered in reliefs and inscriptions that told stories of divine creation, royal conquests, and sacred rituals. These were not just decorative embellishments, they were part of the living architecture, communicating messages from the pharaoh to the gods and from the gods to the people. The architecture itself became a form of communication, a channel for divine power. And it wasn't just the grand structures that were significant. Even the small, personal shrines found in homes or along the banks of the Nile were designed with care, meant to connect the inhabitants with the gods in their everyday lives. These shrines were adorned with miniaturized versions of the great temples and were a reminder that the divine presence could be found anywhere, even in the most humble of spaces. Perhaps one of the most visually striking elements of Egyptian architecture is the obelisk. These towering stone monoliths, often inscribed with the names of kings and gods, were originally erected as markers for important religious sites. But they also served as a political tool, a way for pharaohs to commemorate their reigns and victories. The sheer size and symmetry of the obelisks were awe-inspiring. Many of these monumental structures, made of solid granite, weigh hundreds of tons and were erected with an almost otherworldly precision. The purpose of the obelisk was not just to stand tall, it was to catch the sun's light and reflect it back to the heavens, symbolizing the king's role as a divine intermediary between the gods and the people. Even when it comes to everyday buildings, the Egyptians didn't slack on design. Houses were made from mud brick, a material that was cheap, plentiful, and provided natural insulation against the desert heat. The common house in ancient Egypt was simple, but functional. It often consisted of a central courtyard surrounded by rooms used for living, cooking, and sleeping. Upper-class homes, on the other hand, were much larger and more complex, with more luxurious materials and rooms designed for leisure and entertainment. But no matter the social status, all homes were designed with the same basic principle in mind: functionality and harmony with the natural environment. The architecture of these homes was in tune with the environment, ensuring that the occupants had the best possible conditions for living in a desert. Even the city planning of Egypt was done with great care. The most famous example is Akhetaten, the city built by the pharaoh Akhenaten, dedicated to the worship of the sun god Aten. This city, though short-lived, was one of the earliest examples of a city planned around a central religious theme. The streets were laid out to align with the sun's movements, and the temples were placed to ensure that the rays of the sun shone directly on the statues of the gods. It was a city where architecture and religion were inseparable, where the physical design of the city itself embodied the worship of the divine. Despite the grandeur of the temples and tombs, the Egyptians were also practical in their designs. The Nile River, with its predictable flood cycles, dictated much of the development. The ancient Egyptians constructed sophisticated systems of irrigation, channels, and basins to control the flow of water and ensure that their crops flourished. The ability to manage the Nile, to use it as a source of both life and spiritual connection, was perhaps one of the most enduring elements of Egyptian architecture. From the grandest pyramid to the humblest farmstead, architecture in ancient Egypt was deeply intertwined with both the physical environment and the divine realm. The Egyptians were not only building structures that would last through the ages, they were building connections. Connections to their gods, to the cosmos, and to each other. And these architectural feats served as lasting symbols of their belief in order, permanence, and divine favor. In the midst of their daily toil, their devotion to the gods, and their struggles against the elements, the Egyptians created monuments that not only reflected their culture but would continue to stand, enduring long after the civilization itself had faded. It was, and still is, a testament to their vision, their ambition, and their devotion. We've traveled through the scorching heat, the bustling temples, the vibrant festivals, and the timeless monuments of ancient Egypt. But as we reach the final chapter of our journey, it's time to reflect on something deeply essential: the afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but rather a transition. The way they viewed death and the steps they took to prepare for it would shape their entire existence, from the moment they were born to the moment their body was laid to rest. The Egyptians had a unique understanding of what came after life, one that was intricately tied to their spirituality, their religious practices, and their culture's deep belief in eternity. To the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife wasn't some distant, abstract concept, it was as real and as important as life itself. From the moment of birth, Egyptians were preparing for death, often without even realizing it. And this preparation took many forms, starting with the very tombs that housed their bodies after death. Whether a simple pit in the sand or a grand pyramid filled with treasures and symbols, a tomb was essential for ensuring that the deceased had a safe passage into the next life. For the wealthy and powerful, these tombs were incredibly elaborate, filled with everything a person might need in the afterlife, from food and drink to clothing, jewelry, and even servant figurines that would continue to serve them in eternity. For the common people, the tombs were far less grand but still carefully prepared. Amulets, offerings of food, and written prayers were placed within the tomb to help the deceased navigate the afterlife. And it wasn't just about what was in the tomb, it was about the rituals that surrounded it. Funerals were long, multi-day affairs designed to ensure that the deceased soul was prepared to travel through the underworld and into the realm of the gods. But death wasn't as simple as just placing the body in the ground and hoping for the best. The Egyptians believed that after death, the soul would be judged, and this judgment would determine whether they could enter the afterlife or be condemned to oblivion. The most famous aspect of this judgment process was the weighing of the heart, a ceremony that took place in the Hall of Maat, where the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was light enough to balance with the feather, the soul was deemed pure and allowed to enter the field of reeds, a paradise-like afterlife where the deceased could live in peace, enjoying eternal happiness, abundance, and beauty. This paradise was seen as a reflection of life on earth, but without the hardships. It was a place where one could fish, hunt, and sail on the Nile, surrounded by loved ones and the gods themselves. However, if the heart was found to be heavy with sins, if the deceased had committed wrongs in their life, then they would be devoured by Amit, the monstrous creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hind legs of a hippopotamus. Amit would consume the soul, erasing it from existence forever. There was no second chance, no redemption. Once eaten, the soul would cease to be, lost forever in the chaos of the underworld. This belief in divine judgment was part of a larger system of spiritual laws that governed both life and death. The Egyptians believed in the concept of Ma'at, a cosmic order that kept the universe balanced. In life, individuals were expected to live in accordance with Ma'at, upholding truth, justice, and harmony. If they lived a life in balance with Ma'at, they could expect a peaceful afterlife. But if they lived unjustly, disrupting the balance, their souls would be condemned to the chaotic and dangerous world of the underworld. For the pharaohs, death and the afterlife took on an even greater significance. The pharaoh was not just the king of Egypt, he was believed to be a living god, the direct intermediary between the gods and the people. Upon his death, the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife was marked by an elaborate process of embalming, mummification, and entombment, all designed to preserve his body and soul for eternity. The most famous example of this is the tomb of Tutankhamun, the boy king who, though he ruled Egypt for only a short time, left behind one of the most extraordinary burial sites ever discovered. His tomb was filled with treasures, weapons, and priceless artifacts, all intended to ensure that he would be well equipped for his journey into the afterlife. The pharaoh's tomb wasn't just a resting place, it was a portal to the divine world. The tomb, filled with paintings, carvings, and inscriptions, acted as a map for the soul, guiding it through the dangers of the underworld and ensuring that it could successfully navigate the trials it faced. The tomb was also filled with ritual objects meant to honor the gods and invite their protection. This belief that the afterlife was just as important, if not more so, than life itself led to the construction of some of the most magnificent monuments in human history, from the pyramids to the elaborate temples and tombs in the Valley of the Kings. But while the tombs of the rich and powerful were grand and filled with wealth, the common folk had their own way of ensuring a safe passage into the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and prayers, was placed in many tombs to help the deceased navigate the underworld. This guidebook to the afterlife contained instructions on how to face the various trials that would occur in the afterlife, from battling serpents to avoiding the wrath of the gods. The Book of the Dead was like a spiritual map, providing both the deceased and their family with a sense of comfort and security, knowing that their loved ones had the tools to survive their journey into the next world. Life and death in ancient Egypt were never separate. They were always intertwined, connected by the belief that everything, life, death, the afterlife, was part of a divine cycle. The Egyptians didn't just live for the moment, they lived for eternity. Every action, every word, every ritual, no matter how small, was done with the understanding that it contributed to the cosmic balance of the universe. The gods were everywhere, from the river to the skies, from the land to the afterlife. And for the Egyptians, as long as they upheld the laws of Ma'at and honored the gods, they would ensure their place in eternity. And so, as we come to the end of our journey through ancient Egypt, we're reminded that, despite the incredible achievements of their civilization, it was their understanding of life and death that truly defined their culture. The Egyptians believed that life didn't end with death, it was merely a continuation, a transition to a new existence, one where the gods watched over you, where the cycles of the cosmos kept moving, and where the promise of eternity was always within reach. The pyramids, the tombs, the rituals, they were all part of the great journey toward the afterlife, a journey that transcended the earthly struggles and gave meaning to the lives of all those who lived in ancient Egypt.